I trusted my mother to watch my 3-year-old autistic son while I worked a desperately needed double shift. I came home to find Noah clutching a plastic crucifix, unable to speak, flinching at every touch, and my mother standing there with a satisfied smile, telling me how she'd taken him to some church to pray the autism away. 6 hours of strangers holding down my baby, trying to cast out demons that existed only in their twisted minds. That's when I realized the woman who raised me had become the greatest threat to my child's safety. She thought she was saving Noah, but she just declared war on the wrong mother. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. My name is Kate Thompson, and I'm 29 years old. If you told me 3 years ago that I'd be working 2 jobs while raising my son alone, I probably would have laughed. Not because it seemed impossible, but because I always imagined I'd have more help, more support, more understanding from the people who were supposed to love us most. Noah is 3 now. He has these incredible brown eyes that seem to see everything, even when he's not looking directly at you. When he was diagnosed with autism 6 months ago, I felt this strange mix of relief and terror. Relief because, finally, we had answers for why he didn't respond to his name the way other kids did, why loud noises made him cover his ears and rock back and forth. Terror because I knew what people would say, what they would think, what they would try to fix. The diagnosis came after months of appointments, evaluations, and sleepless nights spent researching every possible explanation for Noah's behavior. Dr. Rebecca Martinez at the Developmental Pediatrics Clinic was gentle when she delivered the news. She sat across from me in her small office, Noah playing quietly with blocks in the corner, and explained that autism wasn't something to cure or fix. It was just how his brain worked. Different, not broken. I cried that day. Not from sadness, but from exhaustion. Finally knowing felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years. My mother, Judith, moved in with us 2 months after Noah's diagnosis. She'd had what the doctors called a mild heart episode. Not quite a heart attack, but serious enough to scare her into selling her house 3 states away and moving closer to family. Which meant closer to us. Which meant closer to Noah. "I can help with the boy," she said when she called to tell me about her plans. She always called him the boy when she was trying to sound practical. When she was feeling generous, she used his name. I welcomed the help at first. Working morning shifts at the diner and evening shifts at the retail store left me exhausted most days. Having someone to watch Noah, someone family, seemed like a blessing. I should have remembered that my mother's version of help always came with conditions. The red flags started small. Comments that could have been innocent if you didn't know Judith Thompson the way I did. "He's awfully quiet today," she'd say when I came home from work to find Noah sitting in exactly the same spot where I'd left him that morning. Did he eat anything? He barely touched his lunch. Normal children his age are usually running around, making noise. Normal. That word followed Noah around our house like a shadow. Normal children did this. Normal children said that. Normal children didn't line up their toy cars in perfect rows for 20 minutes at a time. I tried explaining what the doctors had told me. How Noah's brain processed information differently. How his quietness wasn't defiance or sadness, but just his way of managing a world that often felt too loud, too bright, too much. Judith would nod along, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. The same look she used to give me when I was 12 and tried to explain why I'd rather read than go to youth group. My childhood with Judith had been a masterclass in conditional love. Everything was about appearance, about what other people would think. Church every Sunday, prayer before every meal, and absolute silence about anything that might make the Thompson family look less than perfect. When I got pregnant with Noah at 25, unmarried and unsure, she'd been more concerned about what the congregation would say than whether I was okay. "People will talk, Catherine," she'd said, using my full name the way she always did when she was disappointed. "They'll say I raised you wrong." I'd moved across the country partly to escape that suffocating need for perfection. But here she was again, bringing that same energy into my home, around my son. The first real breakthrough with Noah came 3 weeks after Judith moved in. We'd started him in a new therapy program with Miss Sarah, a speech therapist who specialized in working with autistic children. Noah had been resistant to most forms of therapy before, but something about Miss Sarah's quiet, patient approach seemed to reach him. I was sitting in the observation room, watching through the one-way mirror as Noah played with wooden blocks. Miss Sarah sat on the floor beside him, not pushing, not demanding, just being present. Then it happened. Noah looked up from his blocks and made direct eye contact with her. Not just a glance, but sustained, intentional eye contact. He held her gaze for nearly 10 seconds before looking back at his blocks. I started crying right there in the observation room. Happy tears. Proud tears. This was huge for Noah. This was progress. When I got home that afternoon, I was practically floating. Judith was in the kitchen, preparing what she called a proper dinner. Pot roast with vegetables. Nothing like the simple meals Noah actually preferred. "How is therapy?" she asked without looking up from her cutting board. "Amazing," I said, setting my purse down and looking around for Noah. He made eye contact today. Real, sustained eye contact. Miss Sarah says it's a significant milestone. Judith responded, her tone flat. "Did he say anything?" "Well, no, but that's not really the point. Eye contact is." "He's 3 years old, Catherine. Most children are talking in full sentences by now." The joy drained out of me like water through a broken dam. "Mom, we've talked about this. Noah communicates differently. Today was huge for him." "If you say so." She turned back to her vegetables, dismissing my excitement with the same casual indifference she'd shown my accomplishments my entire life. That evening, after Noah was asleep, Judith brought out a photo album I hadn't seen in years. Pictures of me as a child, dressed in frilly church dresses, standing stiffly beside her at various church functions. "You were such a good child," she said, turning the pages slowly. "Always well-behaved. Always presentable. People used to comment on how well-raised you were." She lingered on a photo of my 8th birthday party. I was wearing a pink dress I'd hated, smiling a smile that didn't reach my eyes, surrounded by children from our church whose names I could barely remember. "I made sure you had structure," she continued. "Rules. Discipline. That's what children need. Especially children who are different." The way she said different made my skin crawl. Like it was a disease. Like it was something shameful. "Noah doesn't need discipline, Mom. He needs understanding. He needs patience." "What he needs," Judith said, closing the album with a sharp snap, "is proper guidance. Children don't raise themselves, Catherine. And they certainly don't get better without intervention." I wanted to argue, but I was exhausted. Working 2 jobs, managing Noah's therapy schedule, and now constantly defending my parenting choices to my own mother was wearing me down. I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. My best friend Jenna called the next morning while I was getting ready for my shift at the diner. Jenna and I had been friends since college, and she'd been one of the few people who didn't treat Noah's diagnosis like a tragedy. She asked real questions about his therapy, celebrated his small victories, and never once suggested that he needed to be fixed. "How's having your mom there?" she asked after I'd updated her on Noah's progress. I hesitated. Jenna knew my history with Judith. She'd been there during the worst of it, had seen how my mother's criticism could reduce me to tears even as an adult. "It's complicated," I admitted. "She helps with practical things, but she doesn't really understand Noah. Or autism in general." "Has she said anything specific?" Jenna's voice carried that protective edge I knew well. "Just comments. About how he should be talking more, acting more normal. Yesterday, she basically dismissed his therapy progress because he's not where she thinks he should be developmentally." "Kate." Jenna's voice was serious now. "Your mom's never changed. You know that, right? She's still the same woman who made you feel like you had to be perfect to be loved. Don't let her do that to Noah." "I won't," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. "Be careful," Jenna said before we hung up. "I love you, but your mom has a way of getting into your head. Don't let her convince you that there's something wrong with Noah that needs fixing." That afternoon, I got a call from my manager at the retail store. One of the overnight stalkers had called in sick, and they were offering double pay for anyone willing to cover the shift. Overnight shifts were brutal, but double pay meant I could finally catch up on some of Noah's therapy bills. When I got home, I found Judith in the living room, reading one of her devotional books while Noah played quietly with his cars nearby. He had them arranged in a perfect line, organized by color, and was gently rolling them back and forth. It was one of his self-soothing behaviors, something that helped him regulate when the world felt overwhelming. I got called in for an overnight shift, I told Judith. It's good money, but I wouldn't get home until around 7 in the morning. Would you be okay watching Noah? Judith looked up from her book, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression. Something that might have been anticipation. But it was gone so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. Of course, she said. That's what I'm here for. I spent the next hour going over Noah's routine with her, even though she'd been living with us for weeks and should have known it by heart. No sugar after 6 p.m., or he'd be up all night. No loud TV shows or music that might overwhelm him. His comfort blanket was in the closet if he got upset. And absolutely no unscheduled outings. He's had enough disruption lately with all the therapy and changes, I explained. Let's just keep things calm and predictable. Judith nodded along, but I noticed she seemed distracted, her eyes drifting toward the window as if she was thinking about something else. I kissed Noah goodbye, inhaling the sweet scent of his baby shampoo and feeling that familiar tug of guilt that came with leaving him. He looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and reached up to touch my cheek, his way of saying goodbye. Mommy loves you, I whispered. Be good for Grandma. As I drove to work, I tried to shake the uneasy feeling that had been following me around all day. Judith was his grandmother. She loved Noah in her own way, even if she didn't understand him. What could go wrong in one night? I should have trusted my instincts. The overnight shift felt endless. 13 hours of unpacking boxes, stocking shelves, and trying to stay awake on my feet. By the time 6 a.m. rolled around, every muscle in my body ached, and all I wanted was to get home to Noah and maybe catch a few hours of sleep before my afternoon shift at the diner. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Not unusual. Noah was usually still asleep at this hour, and Judith was an early riser, but not this early. I used my key quietly, expecting to find them both still in bed. But Noah's room was empty. His blankets were thrown back, his comfort blanket nowhere to be seen. My heart started pounding as I checked every room in the house.
No Noah. No Judith.
No note.
No explanation.
I grabbed my phone and called Judith's cell. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. The panic was rising in my chest now, making it hard to breathe. Where were they? Why wouldn't she answer her phone? I was about to call the police when I heard a car door slam outside. I ran to the window and saw Judith's old sedan in the driveway. She was getting out of the driver's seat, wearing clothes I'd never seen before, a long navy dress with sleeves that covered her arms completely, and a small hat pinned to her gray hair. Church clothes. But it was Tuesday morning. Why was she dressed for church on a Tuesday morning? The passenger door opened, and Noah climbed out slowly. Even from the window, I could see something was wrong. He was moving differently mechanically, like he was in a daze. In his small hand, he clutched something plastic and white. I met them at the front door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Where were you? I demanded before they'd even stepped inside. I came home and you were gone. No note, no text, nothing. I was about to call the police. Judith walked past me into the living room, her chin raised in that defiant way I remembered from childhood arguments. We went to church, she said simply, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Church. It's Tuesday morning, and I specifically told you no unscheduled outings. It wasn't exactly unscheduled, she replied, setting her purse down on the coffee table with deliberate calm. I've been planning this for weeks. Noah was still standing in the doorway, clutching that white plastic object. As he got closer, I could see what it was, a small crucifix, the kind they sold in church gift shops. His eyes looked unfocused, distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. Noah, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to his level. Are you okay?
He didn't respond. He didn't even look at me.
Instead, he started rocking slightly, a behavior I hadn't seen from him in weeks. His free hand began flapping at his side, rapid, agitated movements that meant he was overwhelmed or distressed. What did you do to him? I asked Judith, my voice rising. We had a healing session, she said, and there was something triumphant in her voice that made my stomach turn. God touched him today, Catherine. I could feel the Holy Spirit working. I felt physically ill. A healing session? What does that mean? What kind of church did you take him to? The kind that believes in miracles, she replied. The kind that doesn't just accept brokenness as inevitable. He's not broken. The words came out as a shout, loud enough to make Noah flinch and rock harder. I lowered my voice, but the anger was still there, burning in my chest. He's not broken, and he doesn't need healing. Look at him, Catherine. Judith gestured toward Noah, who was now stimming so aggressively that I was genuinely worried he might hurt himself. Look how he's acting. When I picked him up from that session, he was calm, peaceful. Whatever they did worked. This is not calm. I moved toward Noah, trying to get his attention, but he seemed completely disconnected from reality. Noah, baby, can you hear Mommy? Nothing. He continued rocking and flapping, his grip on the plastic crucifix so tight his knuckles were white. You took him somewhere without telling me, I said, standing up to face Judith. For the first time in my adult life, I was genuinely yelling at my mother. You took my son to some random church and let strangers do God knows what to him. They're not strangers, she said coldly. They're believers. And you should be thanking me instead of screaming like a banshee. I'm trying to help your son. Help him with what? He doesn't need help. He needs acceptance. He needs understanding. He needs people who love him exactly as he is. He needs deliverance, Judith said, and the word hit me like a physical blow. Those people at that church, they know about children like Noah. They know how to pray the demons out. Demons? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think my son has demons? I think your son has been touched by something unclean, and today we started the process of making him whole. I stared at her, this woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me, who was supposed to love my child unconditionally. In that moment, she felt like a complete stranger. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Jenna. She answered on the second ring. Kate? You sound upset. What's wrong? Can you come over? My voice cracked. Please. I need you here. I'm on my way. While we waited for Jenna, I tried to help Noah calm down. I got his comfort blanket from the closet and sat on the floor beside him, not touching. He didn't like to be touched when he was overstimulated, but just being present. Slowly, gradually, his rocking decreased. The flapping stopped. But he still wouldn't make eye contact, and he still clutched that crucifix like his life depended on it. Judith sat in her chair, reading her devotional book as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't just traumatized my child. What was the name of this church? I asked. Deliverance Circle Ministry, she said without looking up from her book. Pastor Williams runs a very powerful ministry there. He's helped dozens of children. I grabbed my laptop and searched for the church. What I found made me feel sick all over again. Deliverance Circle Ministry had been investigated by the state twice in the past 5 years for their treatment of children. There were news articles about exorcism rituals performed on minors, testimonials from former members describing traumatic experiences. And at the center of it all was Pastor James Williams, a man with no formal theological training who claimed to specialize in casting out the spirits that cause developmental disorders. Jenna arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at Noah still rocking with his plastic crucifix, and immediately understood the severity of the situation. Tell me everything, she said. I explained about coming home to an empty house, about Judith's church clothes, about the healing session, and the demons she thought were inside my son. She took him to Deliverance Circle Ministry, I said, showing Jenna the articles I'd found online. Jenna's face went pale as she read. Kate, this place has been investigated multiple times. There are reports of children being physically restrained during these deliverance sessions. Some kids have been hospitalized. Hospitalized for what? Dehydration, exhaustion, psychological trauma. One kid had to be treated for bruising after they held him down for 3 hours trying to cast out his autism. I looked at Noah, still rocking gently, and noticed for the first time that there were red marks on his upper arms. Finger-shaped marks. Bruises. They held him down, I whispered. Jenna saw the marks too. You have to report this. This is child abuse. She's his grandmother. She's my mother. And she took your autistic 3-year-old to a place known for traumatizing children and let them physically restrain him in the name of religion. Kate, look at him. Look at what they did to your son. That night, after Jenna helped me get Noah settled into bed, I sat at my kitchen table filling out a report for Child Protective Services. Every word felt like betraying my own family, but every time I looked at the bruises on Noah's arms, I knew I had no choice. Judith had gone to her room without saying another word to me.
No epaledi.
No acknowledgement that she'd done anything wrong. Just that same self-righteous certainty that had defined my entire childhood. As I sealed the envelope containing my formal complaint, I realized something had fundamentally changed between us. The woman sleeping down the hall wasn't just my difficult mother anymore. She was someone who had hurt my child. Someone who thought my son was possessed by demons. Someone who believed she had the right to make decisions about his treatment without consulting me. I took photos of Noah's bruises with my phone, documenting the evidence. Then I sat beside his bed and watched him sleep, one hand still clutching that plastic crucifix even in his dreams. Tomorrow, I would call CPS. Tomorrow, I would start the process of protecting my son from the person who was supposed to help me raise him. But tonight, I just sat there wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast, and whether I'd ever be able to trust anyone with Noah again. The CPS caseworker, Mrs. Angela Foster, arrived at 8 in the morning, exactly when she'd said she would. She was a thin black woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between rage and guilt, wondering if I was doing the right thing by reporting my own mother. Mrs. Foster sat at my kitchen table with a thick folder and a digital recorder, asking questions in a calm, professional voice while Noah played with blocks in the living room, still unusually quiet after yesterday's ordeal. Can you walk me through exactly what happened yesterday morning? She asked. I told her everything. Coming home to an empty house. Judith's church clothes. Noah's condition when they returned. The bruises on his arms. The plastic crucifix he still wouldn't let go of. And your mother told you she took him to Deliverance Circle Ministry?
Yes.
She said they had a healing session and that God had touched him. The words felt bitter in my mouth. Mrs. Foster made notes. I'm familiar with that establishment. We've had several reports over the years. Can you show me your son's arms? I called Noah over, and he came willingly enough, though he still seemed disconnected, distant. Mrs. Foster examined the finger-shaped bruises on his upper arms with practiced eyes, taking photos with her phone. These are consistent with restraint marks, she said quietly. Has Noah displayed any other changes in behavior since yesterday? He won't make eye contact anymore. He was just starting to do that consistently in therapy. And the stimming, the hand flapping and rocking, it's worse than it's been in months. His therapist says regression like this is common after traumatic experiences. Mrs. Foster nodded and made more notes. I'll need to speak with your mother as well. Is she here? She's in her room. She hasn't come out since yesterday. When Mrs. Foster knocked on Judith's door, my mother emerged fully dressed and composed, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She sat across from the caseworker with her chin raised and her hands folded, radiating the same righteous indignation I remembered from every parent-teacher conference and church meeting of my childhood. Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Foster began, I understand you took Noah to a church yesterday without his mother's permission. I took my grandson to receive prayer, Judith replied coolly. Catherine works too much and doesn't have time for his spiritual needs. Can you describe what happened at this prayer session? Pastor Williams and his prayer team laid hands on Noah and asked God to heal him. It's no different from what happens in churches across this country every Sunday. Was Noah restrained in any way during this session? They had to hold him still so he wouldn't hurt himself. Children with his condition often thrash around when the spirit is being cast out. The casual way she said it, his condition, like autism was a disease, made my stomach turn. Mrs. Foster's expression remained neutral, but I could see her pen moving quickly across her notepad. How long did this session last? About 2 hours. Pastor Williams said it might take multiple sessions to completely cleanse him. Multiple sessions? I interrupted. You were planning to take him back? Judith looked at me with the same disappointed expression she'd worn throughout my childhood. Catherine, your son needs help that you're not providing. Those therapy sessions you're so proud of aren't fixing anything. He doesn't need to be fixed, I shouted, then immediately felt bad for raising my voice in front of Noah. Mrs. Foster held up a hand. Mrs. Thompson, I need to inform you that we'll be opening an investigation into yesterday's incident. In the meantime, I'm recommending that Noah not be left alone in your care. You can't be serious, Judith said, but for the first time, her composure cracked slightly. I'm very serious. Additionally, I'll be contacting Deliverance Circle Ministry directly to discuss their practices regarding minors. After Mrs. Foster left, the house fell into an uncomfortable silence. Judith retreated to her room, slamming the door hard enough to make Noah flinch. I called in sick to both of my jobs, something I couldn't afford to do, but Noah needed me home. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Is this Catherine Thompson? The voice was male, older, with a slight southern accent. Yes, who is this? This is Pastor James Williams from Deliverance Circle Ministry. I understand there's been some confusion about our prayer session with young Noah yesterday. My hands started shaking. Confusion? You traumatized my son. Miss Thompson, I want you to know that what we do here is God's work. We've helped dozens of families over the years. Children who couldn't speak, couldn't function normally, living full, productive lives after our intervention. My son was functioning fine. He doesn't need your intervention. With respect, ma'am, your mother brought Noah to us because she could see what you couldn't. That boy is bound by spiritual darkness. But the good news is we can help. In fact, I'd like to invite you to join our support group for mothers of healed children. Thursday evenings at 7. You'll hear testimonies that will change your perspective. Don't call this number again, I said and hung up. But he'd planted a seed of doubt that I hated myself for entertaining. Was I being too defensive? Was I so determined to accept Noah's autism that I was missing something else? Some other explanation for his struggles? I looked at Noah, still playing quietly with his blocks, still clutching that plastic crucifix, and felt a wave of guilt wash over me. What if I was wrong? What if there was something I wasn't seeing? Then Noah looked up at me with those beautiful brown eyes, and for just a moment, I saw a flicker of the connection we'd been building in therapy. My son. Not broken. Not possessed. Just different. Just mine. That afternoon, I took Noah to his regular therapy session with Miss Sarah. I'd called ahead to explain what had happened, and she'd moved some things around to see us immediately. How is he doing? She asked as we settled into the familiar therapy room. Not good. He won't make eye contact anymore. The stimming has increased significantly, and he won't let go of this. I showed her the plastic crucifix. Miss Sarah's expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Children with autism are particularly vulnerable to trauma because their coping mechanisms are already stretched thin. What Noah experienced yesterday, being held down by strangers, being told there's something wrong with him that needs to be fixed, that's exactly the kind of experience that can cause significant regression. Will he recover? Will he get back to where he was? With time, patience, and consistent support, yes. But Kate, you need to understand that this kind of setback can take months to overcome. And if it happens again, it won't happen again. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely up to me. Judith was still living in my house, still convinced she was helping, still planning those multiple sessions Pastor Williams had mentioned. When we got home, I found Judith in the living room watching the local news. She turned up the volume as we walked in. Investigation into local ministry continues as more families come forward with allegations of child endangerment. Deliverance Circle Ministry has been operating in the area for over 20 years, claiming to heal children with developmental disabilities through prayer and spiritual intervention. The news story showed the outside of a small building I recognized from my internet search. Pastor Williams appeared on screen, a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair and an expensive suit. "We stand by our ministry," he was saying to the reporter. "We've helped countless families over the years. These allegations are nothing more than attacks on religious freedom by people who don't understand the power of faith. According to state records, your ministry has been investigated twice in the past 5 years for allegations of child abuse. How do you respond to that?" "Persecution," Pastor Williams replied smoothly. "Jesus himself warned us that those who do God's work would face persecution from the world." The story cut to footage of parents protesting outside the ministry, holding signs that read, "Autism doesn't need healing," and "My child is not broken." Judith turned off the TV and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Those people don't understand," she said quietly. "They're so invested in their children's problems that they can't see the solution when it's right in front of them." "Mom, Noah doesn't have problems. He has autism. It's not the same thing." "Isn't it?" She stood up and walked toward her room. "Your son can barely communicate, Catherine. He doesn't respond to his name half the time. He lines up toys instead of playing with them normally. If that's not a problem, what is?" "Those aren't problems. They're just differences. Noah communicates in his own way. He responds to his name when he's not overwhelmed. And he organizes his toys because it helps him feel safe and regulated." "You keep telling yourself that," Judith said from a hallway. "But I've seen what prayer can do. I've seen miracles happen." That evening, Jenna came over with dinner from my favorite Chinese restaurant. She took one look at Noah, still clutching his crucifix and avoiding eye contact, and immediately understood how serious the situation had become. "How is therapy?" she asked while we ate. "Miss Sarah says the regression could take months to overcome. And that's assuming no more traumatic experiences." "What does that mean for your mom?" I'd been avoiding that question all day, but I couldn't anymore. "I don't know. She's convinced she's helping him. She thinks I'm failing him by accepting his autism instead of trying to cure it." "Kate, you know that's not true, right? You're an amazing mother. Noah is thriving in his own way." "Is he, though? Maybe I am too accepting. Maybe I should be doing more to help him communicate, to help him fit in better with other kids." Jenna put down her chopsticks and looked at me seriously. "Listen to me. Your son is 3 years old. 3. Most neurotypical kids his age are just barely potty trained and can't even share toys without having meltdowns. Noah is calm, gentle, affectionate in his own way, and he's making progress in therapy. The only reason you're doubting yourself is because your mother has spent your entire life convincing you that you're not good enough." She was right, but that didn't make the doubt go away. Later that night, after Jenna had gone home and Noah was finally asleep, still clutching the crucifix, I found myself researching Deliverance Circle Ministry again. This time, I dug deeper, looking for testimonials from the families Pastor Williams claimed to have helped. What I found instead were stories that made my blood run cold. A forum post from a mother whose son was hospitalized after a particularly aggressive deliverance session. Court documents from a custody case where a father tried to prevent his ex-wife from taking their autistic daughter to the ministry. A news article from 2 years ago about a child who'd stopped speaking entirely after experiencing what the ministry called spiritual healing. But there were also testimonials that seemed positive. Parents claiming their children were completely healed after sessions with Pastor Williams. Videos of children who had supposedly been delivered from the spirit of autism and were now speaking, making eye contact, playing normally. Part of me wanted to believe those testimonials. Part of me wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, there was an easy answer to Noah's challenges. But the rational part of me, the part that had spent months researching autism and working with trained professionals, knew better. Autism wasn't a spirit to be cast out. It was a neurological difference that required understanding, not exorcism. But as I watched Noah sleep, one small hand wrapped around that plastic crucifix. I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I was missing something important. Maybe I was so determined to accept his differences that I was failing to help him reach his full potential. The doubt felt like poison in my system, and I realized this was exactly what Judith had always done to me. Made me question my instincts, made me doubt my judgment, made me feel like I was never quite good enough, never quite doing enough. I'd spent my entire childhood trying to earn her approval, and now she was doing the same thing to Noah, trying to make him into something he wasn't so she could feel proud of him. The difference was, this time I had the power to stop it. I just wasn't sure I had the courage. The doubt that had been eating at me since Pastor Williams' phone call finally drove me to do something I never thought I'd do. 3 days after the CPS visit, with Noah still clutching that plastic crucifix and barely speaking, I found myself sitting across from Jenna at a coffee shop, asking her to help me investigate Deliverance Circle Ministry. I need to know the truth, I told her, stirring my coffee absently. What if there are families who are actually helped? What if I'm being too stubborn to see that Noah needs something more than just therapy? Jenna studied my face carefully. Kate, this isn't like you. You've done months of research on autism. You've worked with professionals. Why are you second-guessing everything now? Because my son hasn't spoken a word since that day. Because he won't make eye contact anymore. Because maybe, just maybe, I'm missing something. Jenna sighed and pulled out her laptop.
Fine.
But we're going to do this right. Real research, not just reading testimonials on their website. What we found over the next 2 hours made my stomach turn. Jenna had always been better at digging through public records and court documents than I was, and her skills as a paralegal came in handy. We started with the state investigations Mrs. Foster had mentioned, but Jenna went deeper, finding sealed court records and settlement agreements. Kate, look at this, she said, turning her laptop toward me. There's a lawsuit from 2015 that was settled out of court. A family sued Deliverance Circle Ministry after their 8-year-old daughter was hospitalized following a deliverance session. The settlement was for $200,000. What happened to the little girl? Severe dehydration and psychological trauma. She was in the hospital for a week. According to the medical records, she'd been held down for over 4 hours while they tried to cast out her autism. She didn't speak for 6 months afterward. I felt sick. Are there others? Several. Most were settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements, but I found references to at least 6 different families over the past decade. And Kate. Jenna paused, her face pale. One of the cases involved a child who died. A 5-year-old boy with severe autism. During a particularly intense deliverance session, he had what the medical examiner called a stress-induced cardiac event. The family was told he went home to Jesus, but the autopsy showed signs of prolonged physical restraint and extreme stress. I pushed my coffee away, feeling nauseous. How is this place still operating? Good lawyers, religious freedom protections, and families who are too ashamed or traumatized to speak out publicly. Plus, Pastor Williams has been careful to settle most cases out of court with NDAs. That afternoon, Jenna's research paid off in an unexpected way. She found a woman named Maya Henderson who had posted in an online forum for parents of autistic children, warning them away from Deliverance Circle Ministry. Her post was from 3 years ago, but Jenna managed to track down her email address. Maya responded within hours, asking if we could meet in person. She lived about an hour away, but she said what she had to share was too important for email or phone calls. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Maya was a thin white woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes. She brought a manila folder thick with documents and photographs. I saw your message about Deliverance Circle Ministry, she said, setting the folder on the table between us. Is your child okay? I don't know, I admitted. They did one session with my son. He's been traumatized ever since. Maya nodded grimly. One session was enough to destroy my boy. His name is David. He's 12 now. She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young boy, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and a sweet smile. He was sitting in what looked like a therapy room playing with blocks. This was David before, Maya said. He was verbal, affectionate, doing well in a special needs classroom. He had autism, yes, but he was happy. He was my sweet, gentle boy. She pulled out another photograph, and I had to fight not to gasp. It showed the same boy, but he looked completely different. Thin, hollow-eyed, sitting rigidly in a chair with his hands folded in his lap. His expression was vacant, empty. This was David 6 months after Pastor Williams healed him. Maya continued. He stopped speaking entirely. He stopped making eye contact. He wouldn't let anyone touch him. He'd wake up screaming every night. What exactly did they do to him? Maya pulled out more documents, medical records, police reports, photographs that made me feel sick to my stomach. They tied him to a chair for 6 hours. 6 hours, Kate. They said he was fighting the demon of autism, and they had to keep him restrained so the spirit couldn't escape. When I finally got him back, he had rope burns on his wrists and ankles. He was dehydrated and completely catatonic. Did you press charges? I tried. But Pastor Williams had witnesses who swore David was never harmed. Other church members who testified that I'd given permission for intensive prayer therapy. My own mother testified against me, saying I was an unfit parent who couldn't accept God's will for my son. Your mother was involved? She's the one who took David there in the first place. Just like yours did with Noah, I'm guessing? I nodded, feeling that familiar knot of betrayal in my stomach. The church has a whole system, Maya continued. They target grandparents, especially grandmothers who are struggling to accept their grandchild's diagnosis. They tell them it's not autism, it's spiritual oppression. They convince them that the parents are being deceived by secular doctors and therapists. She pulled out a recording device. I have something else. One of the church staff members contacted me last year. She felt guilty about what happened to David and wanted to make amends. She recorded some conversations with Pastor Williams where he admits they know the treatments are harmful, but he says the ends justify the means. We listened to the recording in the car afterward. Pastor Williams' voice was clear and unmistakable. Some of these kids fight harder than others. The ones with more severe cases, they need more intensive intervention. If a few get hurt in the process, that's the price of spiritual warfare. We're saving their souls, even if we have to break their bodies to do it. I had to pull over to vomit. When we got back to town, I found Jenna already on the phone with a journalist who'd been covering the story. I'm sending you something that's going to blow this case wide open, she was saying. That evening, I sat with Noah while he ate dinner. He was still not speaking, still avoiding eye contact, but he'd started to eat a little more. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. I watched him carefully arrange his chicken nuggets in a straight line before eating them one by one, and tried to imagine him tied to a chair for 6 hours. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just at Pastor Williams and his church, but at Judith. At the woman who had given birth to me, who was supposed to protect my child the way I was protecting him now. Mommy? Noah's voice was so quiet I almost missed it. Yes, baby? Scared. 2 words. The first he'd spoken since the incident. I knelt down beside his chair, being careful not to touch him in case he wasn't ready for physical contact. You're safe now, I told him. Mommy's here. You're safe. He looked at me then, just for a moment, before going back to his chicken nuggets. But it was enough. It was a start. That night, I called Mrs. Foster and told her about Maya, about the recording, about everything we'd discovered. She listened without interrupting, taking notes. This changes things significantly, she said when I finished. I'll need to speak with Maya directly, and we'll need copies of all those documents. What you've uncovered could shut down that ministry permanently. What about Judith? What about my mother? She'll likely be charged as an accessory. Child endangerment at minimum, possibly conspiracy, depending on how much she knew about the church's practices. After I hung up, I sat in Noah's room watching him sleep. He was still clutching that plastic crucifix, but his grip seemed looser tonight. Maybe tomorrow I could convince him to let it go. I was still sitting there when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop interfering with God's work, or face the consequences. The trial began 6 weeks later, on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I'd managed to get time off from both jobs, though the financial strain was killing me. Noah was staying with Jenna during the day. He still couldn't handle being around Judith, who had been living in a hotel since her arrest. The courthouse was packed. Maya sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, flanked by 4 other families who had come forward after the news story broke. Across the aisle, Judith sat with her court-appointed attorney, wearing a navy blue dress that reminded me uncomfortably of the church clothes she'd worn that terrible morning. Pastor Williams was being tried separately on more serious charges, but Judith faced charges of child endangerment, conspiracy to commit abuse, and violation of a custody agreement. If convicted, she could face up to 8 years in prison. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Chun, called me as the first witness. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through water. Everything seemed slow and surreal. "Miss Thompson," she began, "can you tell the court about the events of the morning you returned from work to find your son missing?" I told the story I'd told so many times now it felt rehearsed. Coming home to an empty house. Judith's church clothes. Noah's condition when they returned. The bruises on his arms. His complete regression in the weeks that followed. Was there any indication that your mother was planning to take Noah somewhere that morning?
None.
I specifically told her no unscheduled outings. Noah had been making progress in therapy, and I didn't want to disrupt his routine. What was Noah's condition before this incident? He was thriving. He'd just started making consistent eye contact in therapy sessions. He was using some words, mainly mama and no and more. He was affectionate, calm, generally happy. And after? Complete regression. He stopped speaking entirely for weeks. He wouldn't make eye contact. His stimming behaviors, which had been decreasing, came back worse than ever. He developed what his therapist called trauma responses: fear of being touched, fear of loud noises, nightmares. Judith's attorney, a tired-looking man named Robert Davis, tried to paint me as an overprotective mother who was preventing Noah from getting the spiritual help he needed. "Miss Thompson, isn't it true that you were resistant to any form of treatment for your son that didn't align with your personal beliefs?" "No, that's not true. Noah was receiving evidence-based therapy from licensed professionals. But you refuse to consider any spiritual or religious approaches to his condition? Autism isn't a condition that requires spiritual intervention. It's a neurological difference. So, you're saying that prayer has no place in healing? I'm saying that my son doesn't need healing. He needs understanding, support, and appropriate therapy." The cross-examination was brutal, but I held my ground. When I stepped down, I felt like I'd been through a war. Maya testified next, bringing the same photographs and documents she'd shown me at the diner. Her testimony was devastating. She described in detail what David had endured, the lasting trauma, the fact that he still required round-the-clock care 3 years later. "David will never recover from what they did to him," she said, her voice steady but her hands shaking. "He was a happy, loving child before Pastor Williams got his hands on him. Now he's afraid of his own shadow." The defense tried to argue that Maya was a bitter ex-member with an axe to grind, but her medical records and police reports spoke for themselves. On the second day, the prosecution played the recording Maya's contact had made. Pastor Williams' voice filled the courtroom. "Some of these kids fight harder than others. If a few get hurt in the process, that's the price of spiritual warfare." I watched Judith's face as the recording played. For just a moment, I saw something that might have been doubt, or even horror. But it was gone quickly, replaced by the same stubborn certainty that had defined her my entire life. The prosecution's surprise witness was someone none of us had expected: Pastor Williams' former assistant, a young woman named Rebecca Stone. She'd worked at Deliverance Circle Ministry for 2 years before quitting in disgust. Pastor Williams knew the sessions were harmful, she testified. He had medical textbooks in his office about autism and developmental disabilities. He knew these children weren't possessed. But he also knew that desperate parents would pay anything for a cure. Did he ever express concern about the children's welfare? Once, after a particularly bad session where a little girl was injured, I asked him if we should stop. He said, "Rebecca, these families need hope. If we can't give them a miracle, we can at least give them someone to blame." He meant the demons. It was all about giving the parents someone to blame instead of accepting their children as they were. What do you mean by injured? The little girl had a seizure during the restraint. She hit her head when she fell. Pastor Williams told the parents it was the demon leaving her body. They were so grateful they donated $5,000 the next week. The defense had no effective response to Rebecca's testimony. How do you argue with someone who worked inside the system and witnessed the abuse firsthand? On the third day, Judith finally took the stand in her own defense. She wore the same navy dress and held herself with the same rigid posture I remembered from childhood. Mrs. Thompson, her attorney began, why did you take your grandson to Deliverance Circle Ministry? Because I love him, she said simply. Because I could see he was suffering and his mother wasn't doing enough to help him. What made you think he was suffering? He couldn't speak properly.
He wouldn't look at people.
He acted like he wasn't all there. Pastor Williams explained that these behaviors are signs of spiritual oppression. Did you believe you were helping Noah? I knew I was helping him. I've seen the power of prayer my entire life. I've seen miracles happen. The prosecutor's cross-examination was where everything fell apart for Judith. Mrs. Thompson, were you aware that Deliverance Circle Ministry had been investigated by the state multiple times? I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. Did you know that several families had filed lawsuits against the ministry for child abuse? Those were just attacks on our religious freedom. So, you were aware of the allegations? A pause. Yes. And you took a 3-year-old child there anyway? I believed God would protect him. Even though you knew other children had been hurt? Those families were lying. Mrs. Thompson, we've heard testimony that your grandson came home with bruises on his arms. How do you explain that? Children get bruises. Maybe he fell down. Finger-shaped bruises that matched restraint marks. I don't know anything about that. But you were there during the session, weren't you? Another pause, longer this time. Yes. And you watched while they held down your grandson? They were praying for him. For 6 hours? However long it took. Mrs. Thompson, did your grandson cry during the session? Judith's composure finally cracked. He was confused at first. Did he cry, Mrs. Thompson? Yes. Her voice was barely a whisper. Did he call for his mother? Yes. And what did you do when your 3-year-old grandson was crying and calling for his mother while strangers held him down? I prayed. You prayed. While your grandson was being traumatized, you prayed. I thought it would help him. Help him with what, Mrs. Thompson? What exactly did you think was wrong with Noah that required this kind of intervention? He's not normal. The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. He doesn't act like other children. He doesn't talk right. He doesn't play right. He's just not normal. So, you thought the solution was to have him tied down and traumatized by strangers? I thought God could fix him. Fix what, exactly? The autism. The demons. Whatever was making him act so strange. The courtroom was dead silent. Judith seemed to realize what she'd admitted, and her face went pale. Mrs. Thompson, the prosecutor said quietly, Noah doesn't need to be fixed. He's a perfectly healthy 3-year-old boy who happens to be autistic. And you subjected him to 6 hours of trauma because you couldn't accept that. Judith broke down completely then, sobbing in the witness box. But her tears felt too little, too late. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all charges. Judge Patricia Williams, no relation to the pastor, sentenced Judith to 6 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after 4. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, she mouthed. I felt nothing. 8 months after the trial, Noah spoke his first full sentence since the incident. We were sitting on the floor of our living room, playing with his blocks, when he looked up at me and said, Mommy, blocks are safe. I cried for 10 minutes straight. His recovery had been slow but steady. The nightmares stopped first, then gradually he started making eye contact again. Words came back one at a time. Mama, then no, then yes, then hungry. Miss Sarah said his progress was remarkable, considering the trauma he'd endured. Children are more resilient than we think, she told me during one of our sessions. No one knows he's safe now. He knows he's loved exactly as he is. That's the foundation for all healing. I'd started a support group for parents of neurodivergent children called Stronger Than Stigma. We met every Thursday evening at the community center, and our numbers had grown from 5 families to over 20. Parents shared resources, celebrated victories, and supported each other through the challenges that came with raising children who saw the world differently. One evening, a mother named Carol brought her 7-year-old daughter Emma, who had recently been diagnosed with ADHD. Carol was in tears, worried about the stigma, about what people would think, about whether Emma would ever be normal. My mother keeps saying there's something I could be doing differently, Carol said. Some diet or supplement or therapy that would fix her. She acts like Emma's diagnosis is somehow my fault. I thought about Judith sitting in a prison cell 2 states away. I'd received 1 letter from her in 8 months, a rambling apology that somehow managed to avoid taking real responsibility for what she'd done. I hadn't written back. Emma doesn't need to be fixed, I told Carol. She needs to be understood. She needs advocates who will fight for her right to be exactly who she is. The support group became my passion project. We organized sensory-friendly events for our kids, lobbied the school district for better special education resources, and created a network of families who truly understood what it meant to love a neurodivergent child. The journalist who had covered our story, Michael Reed, won a state journalism award for his exposé on Deliverance Circle Ministry. The series had led to a federal investigation of similar ministries across the country. 3 other spiritual healing organizations were shut down, and new laws were passed requiring religious organizations to undergo background checks before working with children. Michael interviewed me for a follow-up piece 6 months after the trial. "Do you think your mother understood the harm she was causing?" he asked. I thought about it for a long time. I think she was so invested in the idea that Noah needed to be fixed that she couldn't see him for who he really was. She loved the idea of a normal grandson more than she loved the actual grandson she had. "Do you think you'll ever reconcile?" "I don't know. Maybe someday, when I'm sure Noah is old enough to understand what happened and protect himself. But right now, my job is to keep him safe and help him heal. Everything else is secondary." Around the same time, something wonderful happened. Jenna got engaged to her longtime boyfriend Marcus, and she asked Noah to be the ring bearer at their wedding. Noah had never been comfortable in crowds, but he'd grown to love Jenna almost as much as he loved me. "Are you sure?" I asked her. "He might not be able to handle all the people and noise." "Kate, Noah is family. If he can't handle it, we'll adjust. Maybe we'll have a quiet ceremony. Maybe we'll give him noise-canceling headphones. Maybe we'll have backup plans for backup plans. But we're not having a wedding without our favorite little guy." The wedding was beautiful. Noah walked down the aisle in his tiny tuxedo, carrying the rings and a special sensory-friendly pillow that wouldn't overwhelm his tactile sensitivities. When the music got too loud during the reception, Jenna's new husband Marcus took Noah outside to look at the stars, something Noah found endlessly fascinating. "Thank you," I told Jenna during our dance, "for accepting him exactly as he is." "Thank you for showing me what unconditional love looks like," she replied. A year after the trial, I got an unexpected visitor. Maya Henderson knocked on my door one Thursday evening, holding a plate of homemade cookies. "I hope this isn't weird," she said, "but I was in town visiting my sister, and I wanted to see how you and Noah were doing." We sat in my kitchen while Noah played quietly in the living room. Maya looked better than she had during the trial, less tired, more at peace. "How's David?" I asked. "Better. Slowly, but better. He started speaking again last month. Just a few words, but it's progress." "That's wonderful. I wanted to thank you," she said, "for being brave enough to speak out, for making sure that monster got what he deserved. Because of you, my David might actually have a chance at a normal life." "Because of all of us," I corrected. "You were the one who came forward first. You made it possible for the rest of us to be heard." We talked for an hour about our boys, about healing, about the long road ahead. When she left, she hugged me. The first time I'd been hugged by another mother who truly understood what we'd been through. 2 years after the incident, Noah started preschool at a wonderful inclusive program that specialized in supporting neurodivergent children. His teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Walsh, was trained in autism support and understood that Noah's stimming and need for routine weren't problems to be eliminated, but coping strategies to be respected. "He's such a sweet boy," she told me after his first week. "He helps the other children when they're upset, and he has this amazing ability to notice details that others miss. Yesterday, he helped us find a lost toy that had been missing for weeks. He just remembered exactly where he'd seen it last." Noah thrived in this environment. He made friends, quiet, gentle friendships that worked for him. He learned to express his needs more clearly. He developed a love for music and art that brought joy to everyone around him. On the 3rd anniversary of the incident, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I wrote a letter to the parents who had taken their children to Deliverance Circle Ministry, the ones who had genuinely believed they were helping their kids. "I understand the desire to fix what seems broken," I wrote. "I understand the desperation to help your child fit into a world that doesn't seem designed for them. But your child doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be loved, supported, and accepted exactly as they are. They need advocates who will fight for their right to exist in this world as their authentic selves." I posted the letter on the support group's website, and it went viral. Parents from around the country reached out, sharing their own stories of pressure from family members, of their own moments of doubt, of their journey toward acceptance and advocacy. One mother wrote, "I almost took my son to a place like that.
Your story stopped me.
Thank you for saving us from making the worst mistake of our lives." Another, "My daughter is autistic and beautiful and perfect exactly as she is. Thank you for reminding me of that." I framed that letter and hung it in my office. 4 years later, Noah and I were sitting in our backyard, watching him line up his toy cars in complicated patterns that made perfect sense to him. He was 6 now, verbal and affectionate, and absolutely, completely himself. "Mommy," he said, not looking up from his cars, "do you remember when I was scared?" My heart clenched. We'd never talked directly about what happened at the church, though his therapist said he might bring it up when he was ready. "Yes, baby. I remember. I'm not scared anymore. I'm so glad. What made the scared go away?" He looked up at me then, those beautiful brown eyes full of trust and love. "You did, Mommy. You made the scared go away." I scooped him up in my arms and held him tight, this perfect, precious boy who had never needed to be fixed, who had only ever needed to be loved. "You're safe now," I whispered into his hair. "You're safe, and you're loved, and you're perfect exactly the way you are." And for the first time in 4 years, I truly believed it. That night, after Noah was asleep, I took down the last photo of Judith from our hallway wall. It was time to let go of the past and focus on the future we were building together, just Noah and me and the community of people who loved us both exactly as we were. I tucked the photo into a box in the attic, next to the plastic crucifix Noah had finally let go of 2 years earlier. Someday, maybe, Noah would want to know about his grandmother. Someday, maybe, we have a conversation about forgiveness and family and the complicated nature of love. But not today. Today, we were safe. Today, we were whole. Today, we were exactly where we belonged. What would you do if the person you trusted most became the greatest threat to your child's safety? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories that matter, because sometimes the most important battles happen within our own families.